Kate Falcha, welcome back to Irish Granny Tarot. This is our Saturday book, video number 3, The New World by Whitley Strieber. And we were just getting ready to start chapter 9, Shared Lives. So this book is about human and non-human, about the living and the dead, about physical and non-physical. And then an overall presence in a great ground of reality, the basis of all that is, the field of conscious energy. Physics. The visitors want something from us. They have needs. They live in an eternal present with no excitement, no wonder, no beauty, no pain, no terror, everything that defines the human experience. And they come here for surprise, for newness of experience. And in the margins I wrote, is this sad? I don't know. So they come here for new experience, beauty, excitement. We're blind to the future, and they see this as our greatest asset, because then we can be surprised, right? We can have novel experiences and we can learn from it, and it lets us move from here to ascension and ecstasy. They can't do this despite having all the knowledge that they have. They want us to cooperate and join with them. Without their help, we aren't likely to survive. So there's a benefit to both of us. With their help, they would be a huge engine of experience. We could travel the stars. We could travel new paths into a mirror universe or whatever it is. They'll give us the knowledge and we'll give them new experiences to share in our wonder. Are they conscious machines? Do they need natural beings because they realize they're just machines? We can't help being on this journey. They depend on our partnership, this life journey, and they depend on our partnership. So he feels compassion for their need. That's what I asked. This is sad. And he uses this knowledge of this common ground as the basis for a relationship with them. He said some people will fear this as some kind of possession. He goes, it's not possession. They don't want to possess us. We need their knowledge. They need our innocence. And therefore, they won't give us all the knowledge that might damage us because they need us to not know everything. So we're woven from the same fabric. And says we're both predators. More about that later. So they're frustrated by the need to secrecy. It limits them. If they could just give us their knowledge, we would not be going extinct. So we know who we can thank for all that. They share. They don't take. They haven't taken anything from us. They only take from our souls what we've abandoned of ourselves. And this is why it's so important to be awake to our consciousness. It's so important. They feel free to take what we abandon if we don't use our energetic soul light, our energy. They will use it. But they don't take what we hold within ourselves. It's not like that. They'll take everything that we just abandon and forget about. But he says, when you're face to face with them, you can feel their power and you know that they're predators. And you also know that they're wary of us. They don't entirely trust us because we're unpredictable. They go after our souls. We go after their bodies. He says he feared them at first, and he noticed that his cats were terrified of them too. It's important to remember that. He said, cats have souls. Did they feel their soul under threat? And we will talk about that a little more. He said we need to be aware of the nature of the threat they present. He's losing fear, not about the proximity. He's not losing fear because he spent time with them. He's losing fear because he's understanding himself. And when you see yourself in their eyes, you aren't shocked anymore. You will learn to accept yourself, flaws and all. And if you do that, you'll begin to repair the hurts that you've brought to the world. Therefore, you will be companion seekers with the visitors. And if you couch all this in a slightly different way, it's having self-acceptance, self-forgiveness, working on your soul by making yourself a good person. I know that sounds trite, but doing good deeds and working on the light within. The love. February 2019, he was alone with them. And he said it wasn't a pleasant experience because they were angry with him. And then why were they angry? Because he was too slow to get this book written. They wanted him to focus 100% on this book and not on a book he was simultaneously working on, a novel. And they were mad at him. So he says he doesn't have any fear now. He said his wife wasn't perfect and she's ascended and she's very happy. And he says that most of us will too, despite our best efforts. He says ecstasy is everything reconciled. It's accepting all experiences. So beyond strengthening our souls, trying to live a life of love, is also surrendering to the day-to-day and not being in a struggle with it. This is the greatest aim of life, is accepting experience, to be the best person that you can be. He said, what if tens of thousands of scientists could do that and increase their knowledge by communicating with them? This would collapse the barrier between the physical, the non-physical, life and death. He says they're predators in the non-physical. Soul energy is what they're after. Unused, abandoned. We're predators in the physical world. This is symbiotic and it's exciting because we're both intelligent. And like I said before, don't assume that they're smarter than we are. They're just more advanced, and it's because they've developed in a different way. They can empower us in face of looming catastrophe, but we need a strong soul. And he says there's lots of information out there. Most religions talk about making yourself a good person. You know, it sounds silly, but that's what it boils down to. But in the secular belief, there is no soul. And this makes you vulnerable. And he's not advocating everybody get religious. That's not what he's saying. He says, can you build a strong soul outside of a religious context? Be modern and secular and still strengthen your soul. He says, yes, it's not easy, but it's simple. Live a good life. Do unto others. Be as the lilies of the field. Something that I didn't know was so important to emphasize. I'm learning. It's funny. Things present themselves. This book, and then the book we did about Yogananda. I mean, just these things are building on themselves. And that surrender to the events of life, taking them as they come, not worrying all night, which I want to do. Live a good life. And the pitfall of religion is it has a bad attitude towards those who don't share their faith. And he says, we have no certainty to support any religious belief. Like his wife said, what we need is good questions. The best text on meditation that he recommends is a Taoist book called The Secret of the Golden Flower. And it's how to use soul energy and how to increase soul strength. And I have to find that book. Write that down. Is there an objective science of the soul? He says yes, and this is the pyramid text, the Egyptian pyramid text. It's 3,200 years old, found in the pyramid of Unas. The energy that's involved here in our personal energy that we're talking about is the prana, the chi, the kundalini. It's the energy that they use in acupuncture, which they can now photograph. But this is never successfully detected. That's not true. As we learned in the New Science of Heaven, physicists have been able to actually image on some kind of contrast image. I don't know what they used. The acupuncture lines in the body. There is an electrical system. So it evades detection by anybody who doesn't understand that it is conscious. And the master of the key spoke about this. Conscious energy is not like unconscious energy, the servant of those who understand its laws. To gain access to the powers of conscious energy, you must evolve a relationship with it. Learn its needs, learn to fulfill them. Strieber asked how to do this, and the old guy, the master, replied, by first realizing you're not cut off. There is no supernatural. There is only the natural world, and you have access to it all. Souls are a part of nature. He also said that it was part of the electromagnetic spectrum and detectable as such, but also that it isn't passive and will decide whether or not it is to be detected and the degree. That's kind of a mind blower. Visitors are full of this energy. They can feel it. And he says, by the way, it's why acupuncture works. The Egyptians understood all this. Much of our past was lost to catastrophic earth changes, inundation, seismic activity. It's the energy in our spine is the connection between the physical and the energetic body. And we have 3 spiritual bodies, according to the Egyptians. The Ka, the non-physical double of us. The Ba, that could travel between the world of the living and the dead. And the Ak, AKH, is the part that survives death. It vanishes after death. I don't know if that means it vanishes, is gone. It says it survives death, so it must be it vanishes from our ability to see it. The pyramid text sees the spine as a serpent of energy with 7 small serpents coming out from it, which are the equivalent of the chakras, which are circles of energy. Strieber's been out of his body 3 times, and 3 different people saw him. And so he knows that this is not an internal energy necessarily, but it connects through the spine. He felt he was unlocked along the spine when he had his out-of-body experience. He talked with a scientist who saw him. He was conscious and aware. He couldn't control what they talked about. He had a message. He came as the messenger to tell the scientist to face the reality of the soul and to strengthen it by coming to terms with himself. When out of body, it's the consciousness that comes out. It's not borderless. It feels like an orb, but it can become visible. And he said he can't control it. The pyramid text says the spinal cord contains light. It's a concentration of electric energy. It's a life force that generates an electric energy. It's okay, the life force is what generates the electrical energy. You're not just seeing the electrical energy, you're seeing the life force. We detect electrical energy. The visitors see the life force. You can leave your body and be coherent and remain coherent. You do so at death. It's an energy that runs out of the body, rises out of the body as some sort of plasma and experiences life in a new way. Ties those books that we've read now together. And that's what the visitors want. So is this evil or is it just nature being nature? So how do you avoid getting this stolen from you? Because this is what they want. As the visitors become known to people, people are going to freak out about all of this. And we can defeat that fear by strengthening our soul. Be a good person. Easier said than done, but that's the theory anyway. All we need to do is to become good human beings, show love, show compassion, show humility with determination and surrender. His first lesson of the visitors was in humility. Oh, this is a funny story, actually. In 88, the book Communion had some success, and he was bragging about it to his brother. And he heard a voice in his head say, arrogance, I can do anything I want to you. And the next morning, and this is really remarkable, the next morning, because he was talking about the money it made, blah, 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 the bank called him and said, you don't have a bank account with us, and you need to open one and deposit money into it because I've got checks that were made out to you that are outstanding, made out by you that are outstanding. And I won't tell you what I wrote down, but he was shocked. And all his money was in that bank. And he said, well, you've lost my account. And they said, look, you don't have an account and these checks are going to bounce. So he had a very bad sleepless night and he asked them to investigate it further. And he thought about it at night, about his ego and humility and his inflated sense of self-importance about the money he'd made with this book. And he decided that Whitley was just a social tool and it wasn't all that he was. And he realized, okay, I got to get over myself, you know. And then the next day, the bank called and said they found his account. So the master of the key taught him about sin, that our fear of regret causes our fear of the visitors, because we look into their eyes and we see what we've done. The master says sin is the denial of the right to thrive. These guys look deeply into you and find out what they need that you can fulfill. And we are the only thing that we have. We can look through the eyes of others, and we all share the same struggles, and we are alone and in need of help, alone in the universe and in need of help, and they can help us. We need humility and not ego for our love to shine through. And if we can do that, we don't need to hide from them. Love flows out of compassion, which rests in humility. Enlightenment is what happens when there's nothing left of us but love. So you live this way and the visitors will not be demons, they will be angels. It's interesting because they're kind of both. The only thing that burns in hell is the part of you that won't let go of your life. Your memories, your attachments, they burn all away, but they're not punishing you, they're freeing your soul. If you're frightened of dying and you're holding on, you'll see devils tearing your life away, but if you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels freeing you from the earth. Life with the visitors begins when we have made our peace with ourselves. Chapter 10. Dark Truths and Lights. What is the danger in close encounters? He says the early on forced abductions were dark because no one had formed a relationship. Nobody knew what was going on. Fear. Strieber met Bud Hopkins, if you know Bud Hopkins, who is really prominent in this field. And also was an artist, and also lived for a very long time with journalist Leslie Kean, who's now working with the New York Times to talk about the whistleblower. Small world. Anyway, Strieber met Bud Hopkins, who led him to Dr. Donald Klein and to hypnosis, and he remembered the events that led to the writing of the book Communion. His relationship with the visitors has evolved dramatically, and the nature of the encounter of most other people has also improved. From fear, they've gone into a deeper search for something inner meaning. Psychologically, intellectually, and spiritually, it's created exploration in all those realms. The first hypnosis, he remembered seeing Kobold, one of those little blue guys, in his bedroom, and it upended his world vision. He was screaming in terror. So this pattern is echoed in a lot of stories that were told to Hopkins and David Jacobs and John Mack. A frightened world, shaking initial encounter, and eventually a long struggle to come to terms with it. There's an organization called FREE that studies this, the change in perception of encounters, and it was begun by experiencer, called to action by the phenomenon itself. And they keep data in Beyond UFOs by FREE. It was published. And they have a website and they have questionnaires, and they're creating a large profile of what do people think has happened. You know, how does your thinking change because of what's happened to you? And more than 5,000 people have done this, and they say they think a pretty reasonable, accurate picture. In the book Supernatural, Dr. Jeff Kripal puts it in terms of the shaman experience. I think this is so interesting because as our ability to understand complexity has increased through historical time, the narrative changes. Now it's all technological space stuff. It wasn't always that way. And let me read for you what he says. Okay, this is Dr. Kripal talking from his book, The Supernatural. The first contact is initiatory. The calling of the shaman is often signaled an initiatory illness, a severe psychological trial or physical illness that affects the transformation of the future shaman's being, that spiritually mutates him, if you will. Other common tropes include the presence of power animals or totems, the ability to leave one's body and travel in the interworld, a proclivity for trance states and robust visionary experience, erotic contact or marriage between the shaman and a particular deity, spirit, or discarnate being, and the use of psychoactive sacred plants to catalyze and supercharge these various magical powers. This could be a description of the opening phase of a life in close encounter. As such, Strieber says, I see it as one part of a vast process of re-enchantment of the world. In the afterlife revolution, Anne and I make the point that the near-death experience is like the close encounter experience, upending of one's understanding of reality and also initiatory in nature. In addition, medical advances, which are increasingly able to return people from the edge of death, are causing a distinct increase in such experiences. In Changed in a Flash, for example, Elizabeth Crone describes actually being asked to decide while her body lay effectively dead whether or not to come back. She did and was able to because modern medical science could save her. Now, the stuff about the shaman is from Shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy, 1964, by Mircea Eliade. Are near-death experiences and close encounters both initiations? This is what he's asking. It's a change in our awareness. We're initiated into a change in awareness. Not necessarily the arrival of alien beings. It changes how we see the world. It changes how our brain works. On his first abduction, he says he was embarrassed to admit this, but he had semen taken and injured him, and he still has residual effects of that. But he and his wife were later shown a baby that came as a result of this. So he says there was a real confusion of emotions and possibilities, and it was ominous, bizarre, dangerous. He didn't think that still doesn't think that the visitors are good or bad. It's more complicated than that. For humans, he says, we have a moral range which is really broad, and humans can be really good or really bad. Gandhi and Hitler were around at the same time. He says these visitors are the same. There's different aspects of them, and it would depend on the agenda of the particular one you encounter. It doesn't even have to be a different species of one. There's variety within species of them. He says, and we do this sort of thing with animals. It makes it very disturbing to think about this. We test them, breed them, observe them, study them. He says, fewer abductions are happening now. Have they begun to recognize the assault to our dignity that is? So we can individually and collectively improve our standing with them, he believes. He says, think about cattle mutilations, and there are also cat mutilations that are very similar. He says, we study animals the same way. We test them and kill them. And these animals, he cited all these incidents. It's really very disturbing, of animals mutilated in the same way with their spinal columns pulled out. And pulled out through tiny slits, not pulled out in a big messy thing. And how is that possible? He describes this weird stalking man in the woods when they were living in Texas. And he said he felt the menace within him. It was very uncomfortable. And this guy ended up living in the condo next door with two other really weird and disturbing guys. And he describes this guy as hiding behind trees and compulsively smoking and really being weird. And he saw one in the store steal an entire cart of cigarettes, pipe tobacco, rolling papers, all under the eyes of the clerks and other customers. Strieber was the only one who wasn't staring frozen straight ahead and silent in the store. And he said this guy walked right past him with this cart full of tobacco products and glared at Strieber on the way out. And so he realized they were squatting in the condo, and he told the owners, and these guys got evicted. But they were wandering around selling the owners furniture, and it felt very full of menace. Nobody would buy it because they knew what they were doing. Strieber heard some stories of people being mutilated, and he followed it up. In 2000, 17 homeless people in New York and New Jersey were kidnapped, mutilated, drowned, and left on rooftops near the site where they were kidnapped. In all of them, their spine had been pulled out through a 3-inch cut. 3-centimeter cut. And undamaged bone. I mean, just, it's too weird. So in 2002, there was a report of a guy on a farm walking across a field, picked up and taken into a UFO. Strieber heard about this and said, well, is there anybody missing? And sure enough, a guy was reported missing the next day. But then his body was found emaciated near a wetland the following day. Also had his spine removed, and on autopsy, they found tissue on him that wasn't human. They found small metal balls in his abdomen that fluoresced under UV light. And the way that his spine was, this is really gross, the way that his spine was ripped out, it showed damage from a device with a hook. So was this done? Strieber, the only one who asked this, asked, was this done to capture his energetic body? So ancient traditions believe in what's called a hungry soul, a non-physical entity that desires to feel life experience, and this is exactly what Strieber thinks is going on with these visitors. Some Amazonian shamans believe this. They require tobacco smoke to communicate with the physical. Remember the guy stole all the tobacco stuff? Is this why these 3 weird guys in the condo building were obsessed with smoking? They were always smoking. Always. So these cases were investigated by the FBI, these 17 homeless people who disappeared and were found with their spines ripped out. And they had absolutely no explanation physically by the coroner for how it happened, and no explanation from the FBI who may have done it. And Strieber is going, oh, is this hungry souls? If so, it's a spiritual crime. So we need to protect ourselves and build a stronger soul. And, you know, if you're working towards being a good person and you're concerned and have the intention to be a good person and you're trying, then you don't have to worry. So don't be freaking out about this. This is mostly for people in Mar-a-Lago. Okay, Dr. Hynek would not report on these violent activities. He said UFO experiences were already dubious in people's mind and feared, and he thought that they would be discounted if he told these violent stories too. John Keel and Jacques Vallée both believe that these are not actually, you know, aliens, but something stranger with a long history of hostility to mankind. And Vallée wrote about them in his books, Messengers of Deception and Passport to Magonia. Only one death is associated with close encounters. And this was by a guy who was chased by these little blue cobalt people. He actually went after them with a shotgun. And he was found dead, and they don't have a cause of death. They don't know what happened to him. They found his body. They just don't know what happened to him. But they found a weird bulge in his chest, and it was extracted and carried off by, I don't know, Men in Black, I don't know, was carried off and not revealed. So contact can be violent and can be scary, but it's usually not dangerous. And if you're occupying your interest in growing your soul, then you're okay. But we should know why we're being potentially physically threatened. There have been many opportunities, he says, where he could have been hurt and killed. Many. And he uses no weapons, nothing to protect himself. He says he just tries to be open. He doesn't close the door to him. He doesn't hide. He doesn't fight. He hands himself over to them, and they give him knowledge, and they take the feeling of his experience. And he doesn't deprive him of anything to do that. They possess secrets to help us, and if we signaled our availability, they would respond. But it's a gamble. We'd be slaves or dead by now if that's what they really wanted. They're so powerful that it's silly for us to waste our time worrying about it, because if it was going to happen, it would have happened. When he tried to control his fear and not lash out, their relationship to him totally changed. They reacted positively. They've given him science and math, and to scientists too. They don't communicate with government officials or conventional scientists, he says, because most are not capable. They're not doing the work. They're not trying to communicate properly. Language as we know it is not a tool, not a possible tool. They do use demonstrations, they use archetypes, and they use symbology. So chapter 11, the donation site and a word of caution. Dr. Carrie Mullis wrote Dancing Naked in the Minefield. This is the story of a scientist's encounter. It's a story, and he talks about the story of the bilocation of a nun in 1620. And I know this has been mentioned before. I think it might have been in one of Linda Moulton Howe's books that we did. So without going into an enormous amount of detail, because it's really unimportant, in 1620, this nun was one place in New Mexico and suddenly appeared, she was one place in Spain and suddenly appeared in New Mexico at the same time, seen in two places at once, to natives to bring them Christianity. So why do we worry about that? What does that matter? Well, this was a cultural dislocation, and it took part in New Mexico. And the area where this took place, where it's actually part of the mythology of the local area, is the Roswell area. So it's the same place where this UFO crashed, and it left so much debris. It was collected and studied for years. And the theory is this was not an accident. It was a donation. A place where, an interesting place actually, where two events, just stick them together, two events of objects given from another place happened to minimize the negative effects of a dangerous cultural upheaval. So Spain came to the New World and trashed, destroyed, genocide their culture. This nun came and buttered up the indigenous people and got them ready in this place in New Mexico. The Spanish destroyed their culture and they died because they didn't defend themselves against it. She convinced them of the superiority of her religion and culture. They lost their self-esteem about their culture. And then what happens later in the same place? The UFO crashes and technology is given to us and knowledge is available to us. And we see the pragmatic benefit of back engineering and using this knowledge. And we go, oh, wow, they're so smart and they're so advanced. And the great assumption being made that they're going to have our best interests at heart and they are going to do wonders for us, and we make ourselves vulnerable when we think that way. The natives in New Mexico believed it was a new spiritual path given by this mysterious woman, And the UFO debris donation offers us something similar. A fundamental increase in knowledge, including science, technology, and insight into the nature of humanity. They perhaps donated, released this debris to the public, to scientific scrutiny. And academics could study it. And both events were to learn how to and it was an opportunity for us to learn how to safeguard ourselves from the trap that can happen when our culture meets up against an apparently purporting itself to be superior culture. At the time that the first one happened, the Spanish were expanding with technology and bringing their diseases, but they were also engaging in acculturalization, establishing a new social order, destroying the native civilization, and enslaving the natives. And it ended up with greater than 90% of them dead and the rest slaves. The message of the site was contact brings rewards and dangers. We must hold to our beliefs and expectations and treasure ourselves and our civilization. We have to be open but careful, or it's not going to go well. Physical contact is intense. It brings rapid cultural change, confusion, fear. But that's what's on offer here. We're being warned. Keep our own counsel, because these entities, their culture will overwhelm ours. We need to keep our society intact and take responsibility for ourselves. I wonder, is this what's going on right now with the disintegration, apparently, of our society? So for us to have successful contact, we need clear communication, an exchange of enrichment for both of us, and life shared in a new communion. But care has to be taken. We must not be supplicants just because they're technologically advanced. We can't be bowing and scraping and acting pathetic. We have to remember that they may not be ethically advanced or spiritually advanced. The Spanish weren't. The Spanish had no respect for the native culture, and perhaps they'll have no respect for us if we don't have respect for ourselves. Indigenous cultures globally faced extinction even when greeting the visitors that came to them with benevolence. The visitors came and they greeted them with benevolence. Because of their greater power, the indigenous people lost trust in their own cultural ways and beliefs. And this led to humiliation, a loss of self-worth. This destroys society and spiritual culture, even when it's superior. The Inquisition is an example. So because the visitors' technology are superior, we are vulnerable to believing them spiritually superior. They might tell us there is no soul, and we'll have to believe them because they're so smart. They can levitate, so they must be right? Or they can tell us we are angels from God, and we have to obey them. We might believe that too. We will feel inferior, and we will believe that they're right. We must embrace our own strength and stay steadfast. And this scared me because I think I'm going to throw this in here. It's not in the book. I'm going to discuss it with Denise. I worry about how obsessed and connected, especially younger people, are with technology, how impressed they are and dependent on technology. I worry about that. So we must embrace our own strengths and stay steadfast, not be obsessed with these visitors. So their vulnerabilities may be profound. They may be far more vulnerable than we realize. An example he gives is the Nazis. They had superior organizational skills. They had many superior weapons. But ethically, they were impoverished and practically, functionally insane. Their risk is we may not be able to bear them. We may simply not be advanced enough to deal with them. We risk their danger in unrecoverable ways. We will have knowledge of reality, of our energetic body, and of our souls, And our ability to leave the body and travel, how to get non-physical and physical entities to communicate, all of this can arrive. And we would enter a relationship of newness for them and knowledge for us. We'll be able to discover much of their technology and their marvelous abilities, and we may discover that they're inherent. We have the ability to, and we can learn how to do it too. And then where will they be? He calls the part of the soul, that travels your second body, and its travel will be a huge advantage. He was in Northern California on a weekend at an institute, staying with institute members in a dormitory when he left his body and was able to communicate with the third person that he saw. He gave him a telepathic message about the soul and living life without guilt. And he says, unfortunately, this guy found it in a traditional religious sense. He says, that's fine if you can do it without hurting others. Then Strieber found himself rising and ascending through the building into the atmosphere and suddenly landing in a college dorm. And he saw some odd object leaning against a wall that he thought, what is that? Is that a dulcimer? And he later found it was some kind of weird skateboard. And he realized things like this happen when you have these out-of-body experiences. Things that you don't know about in your normal frame of reference have no files for you. And you can't figure out what they are because you're in a different state. So it's hard for him to identify the first time. But another time, he saw it again and he recognized immediately what it was. When he wanted to, he immediately returned to his body. And the scientist he had visited and talked to, the one who found religion, he told everybody about this experience. Others were able to recognize his description of the college dorm that he went to. And it turned out to be the college they had gone to in North Carolina, Wilmington. And now keep in mind, he's in bed asleep in Northern California. So some academics and scientists are beginning to entertain the possibility that, okay, all right, we give in, there are UFOs, but they will not admit ETs. The visitors and us, we're all complex, good and bad. We're both. So, Chapter 12, is any of this real? He hopes this book will encourage these visitors to emerge and communicate because people will be more open. He says they're much more than real. He says our planet can't support us much longer, and parallel universes are real, and he thinks this is why contact has increased. The entities of mythology, lore, and religion may all be real and with us all the time, and the existence of some malevolent presence, the ones possibly that did cattle mutilations, for example, or the 17 murders, also exist, but it's easy to protect yourself against it because they don't want what you're using. They want what you've abandoned. So don't abandon your soul. So he says he believes we're very close to a breakthrough with contact with the dead. And he says as we are approaching a crisis, extinction crisis, this hidden world is coming more and more into focus. And he goes, are both worlds real and both worlds fantasy? On a quantum level, nothing is real until it's noticed and we decide that it's real, and then it is real. He says, like before we mentioned output strategy, we know external structures, but not what the object really is inside comprised of. However, we do have formula and machines to see below, to describe and to see below the external and what our limit is. We're able to use those tools for hidden, to discern the hidden interior workings. So then he starts talking about quantum physics, and I have to apologize because at one point last night when I was reading this, I was just really frustrated because it would have taken me 2 more hours and reams more of notes to really explain this properly. So I'm going to just put out what I wrote down. I don't even know if it's intelligible, coherent. I recommend you read the book. So here we go. So there's this theory that if you look at something and decide it's real, it's real. And if you're not looking at it and you're not thinking it's real, it's not real. And there's this thing called ambiguous quantum indeterminacy. That means it's not determined. It's not there if we don't make it there. So he talks about decoherence, that a wave is really not a solid wave, it's particles, and that a wave will not dissolve, but its appearance of coherence to us is because of its surroundings. So the surroundings define the appearance of it. Okay, I'm not even sure I understand what he's trying to get at here. I have to admit, I'm terrible at physics. So if somebody else understands this, let us know. So he says our brains make the world coherent to us. Is there really coherency there at all? And our output strategy is our reality. What we see is what we get, right? But I wrote in the, the margin, huh? So other animals do it differently. You know, we're not the be-all and end-all. Be-all, get it, what I just did there? Because the next thing is he talks about bees. Bees live in the ultraviolet. They see in the ultraviolet. They relate in the ultraviolet. So inherent ambiguity exists even when we see coherence. And then he goes on a bit about physics, and I wrote, it's all physics. And then he talks about something called the fine structure constant, which is a repeating constant, which is a fraction 1 over 137, which is the splitting border of the hydrogen atom. Okay. And this constant means it's never changing, and it exists everywhere in the universe in nature. And if it was slightly different, everything would be completely different. So he guesses that the visitor's secrecy is to force our minds to grow. And this last couple of paragraphs that I just talked about in the book forced my mind to completely explode. So sorry about that. He talks about Wolfgang Pauli, who was studying this 1 over 137 constant when he got sick and was admitted to the hospital and died in room 137. So Strieber proceeds to discuss what we see as real can also be not real, and that what is knowledge can also be not knowledge, and that we only see what our brain can see. But then, you know, we have things like telescopes and microscopes and stuff. So that in general, ambiguity rules the universe, and the truth is in the universe itself. Now, that's a quote from the book, and I have no idea what he really means. He says, we're passive, they're active. And the third part of this triad is the mystery that holds us together in communication, communion. He says, humanity's at a decision point. Are they parasites and a danger, or is it a symbiotic relationship worth everything? The preponderance of evidence is that our environmental crisis is urgent, that they're real, they're here, and that we can find a new way to communicating with them and a new world. So he says this is like everything else he just talked about in physics. It's a trap and a key. Chapter 13, it's time. So he says he's seen a variety of different types of visitors with different types of approaches to people. He said World War I, World War II, all the deaths, all the killing, they observe this fighting, and their theory about it is completely different than ours. They see this as the pressure created by overpopulation, and that pressure causes violence. He says Hitler talked about it when he talked about living space, which is why they moved everybody, and he took over, you know, Poland and Czechoslovakia, and he wanted more room, more elbow room, you know. And Mao and Stalin both starved huge numbers of people just to provide more space. So these visitors saw the bomb, nuclear bomb, as an extinction threat, and they decided to intervene and to give us space. I'm not quite sure what that means. they don't approach it directly. They do social engineering. And I think he's talking about appearing and scaring people and showing up outside the limits, that kind of thing. November 2018, at the 4th National Climate Assessment, he said the news they came out with about climate change was devastating, and 2018, our president at the time said, and I quote, "I don't believe it." So they immediately, these visitors, increased their efforts to get his book out. They approached him and were mad at him because he's taking too long, because they want to force communication to try to help us. He describes a psychology friend of his who sees, at one point, he was outside and he saw a jet fly low over the freeway. So he's driving on a crowded freeway, and he going along, and he sees this jet get lower and lower and lower and lower. And then he realizes it's not really a jet. What is it? Is it a big cardboard cutout? And then he notices under the jet clusters of people conferring on the freeway, and a signboard flashing hieroglyphics. And so he's just completely perplexed. And then this is one weird thing. This is getting attention. This is social engineering that he's pointing out. Strieber mentions incidents of predicting deaths, being able to predict them, and then, like knowing that so-and-so just died, and then getting a phone call that that person died, and it not being expected. And then seeing that person's soul enter the body of a new baby in his mind, a vision. Some say the visitors refer to themselves as soul technicians doing soul exams on people. The kobolds told one of his friends that someday she would look like them. They said, "Why are you afraid of us?" And she said, "Because you're so ugly." And they laughed at her and said, "Someday you're going to look like us." So are they part of us? Don't know. Many species change forms, Maybe that's how we're meant to end up. Frogs, butterflies, they go through metamorphosis. So we need each other, the visitors and us. June 12th of 2019, he was doing his meditation and he felt entered. Now this is weird, and he describes it a little more in the book. Trust me on this. He felt entered by a schematic. He saw a schematic. I'm assuming he meant some kind of a technology blueprint. And then a few days later, he was meditating and he saw the Vesica Piscis, which is the sacred entity formed by geometry. It's that shape. You can look it up. It's a geometric shape. And it's the foundation of human endeavor because it incorporates geometry and mathematics and the basis of measurement. I think that's where they learned to develop the spirograph. You'll laugh when you look it up. So it's the, let me spell it for you. V as in victory, E-S-I-C-A, and then Piscis, P-I-S-C-I-S, the vessel of the fish, kind of. So it approached and begged to enter him. This is this dream he had. And he found himself in this waking dream. And then all of a sudden a guy was pointing in his dream a toy gun at him. And he felt the message was that he needed soon, quickly, to go deeper, to look for the basis of knowledge, the Vesica Piscis. And that it won't hurt. You're not going to be hurt by this, but do it. There's an urgency to it. Often before doing his early morning meditation, he would see lines like hieroglyphics that were not Egyptian. He'd only see them a couple of times, 3 times a year. It's often enough. And he never really understood them. But in October of 2019, he had a connection while he was asleep, and he didn't know it until later because he kept a voice-activated tape recorder by his bed. And it recorded, he was alone, and it recorded a conversation between him and a woman, and she called him mature, and he thinks that it was a better way of saying master. Master has too many power implications. Mature just means knowledgeable and aged. And it felt like a physical communion. He said we need to embrace the ambiguity of consciousness. Things are not as clear-cut as we like to think they are. He says he's gone beyond fear. He says there's only one of us. We are one. The visitors and humans, the living and the dead, the physical and the non-physical. We are a wave of consciousness. Embrace the ambiguity and achieve the peace of Shanti. You come to rest in your heart and you have nothing left but love, and love is enlightenment. It requires open surrender to achieve the path to greater knowledge. Will they come closer to us? Will they be impossible for us to bear? We have a moment of truth right now that we're facing, extinction or the journey of communion. Will we go with them into a new world? And he says it's time to decide. The end. So I hope this book took away some of the real mortal dread that a lot of people felt after listening to The Key. Because it was dark, yes, and it was hard to hear, yes. I think this elucidated some of that. I think it shone the light on it. It cleared some of it up. It's not a fairy story in the sense it's not made to placate children. It's reality. And this is the reality of our existence, and we have the decision-making ability in this. We have to decide what our path is going to be. Are we going to live ethical lives of compassion and love and work on the light, the kingdom of God within us, and reach that out to other people, or not? It always boils down to that. It always boils down to that. So I hope you enjoyed it, and Denise and I are going to have another discussion. We haven't scheduled it yet, so don't hold your breath, but we are going to do it. And thank you very, very much for watching. And I've got a couple of, it never rains but it pours. I try to schedule conversations with people and do them in a nice sort of regular interval so that there's a little breathing room between them. And inevitably things happen, life happens, and they all cluster. And so there's 3 in a row and then none for 2 months. So I apologize. Savor them. They're not going anywhere. They're on YouTube. You can watch them anytime. And thank you very much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe here. And also, if you can, subscribe to Jackie's Crystal Moon. She's great. My fellow countrywoman. And subscribe to Deborah Lupin, the voice of the Akashic Records. Fascinating stuff. And Deborah's so sweet. And, well, that's kind of cloying, isn't it? She's a wonderful person. And John of Aquarian Diaries, and Denise Siegel, and, et cetera, et cetera. There's a million wonderful people that are doing things like this and putting information out. It's wonderful. So thank you very much, and have a good rest of your weekend. Oh, Sherry, I'm going to be on Sherry's, see, I'm trying to decide what day is this. You'll be watching this on Saturday. Tomorrow, Sunday, I'm going to be with Sherry from the swamp, which I love it. So we'll talk. Thank you very much. Slongafoil. Slancha.